There are oceans upon oceans in the galaxy, but none as vast or as silent as the one between the stars. In that endless black, where light itself grows tired and time forgets its name, humanity sails upon fragile vessels of faith and fire. Each ship a world unto itself, a floating cathedral of steel and sacrifice, guided by men and women who will never again touch the soil of a planet. This is the realm of the Imperial Navy, not of earth or sea, but of the void, a place where distance swallows meaning, and where a single spark of light can be both salvation and doom. They call it the Ocean of Stars, though the name is kind, for it is no gentle sea. It is a pit of silence, a grave of suns, a darkness that has devoured empires older than memory itself, and yet humanity sails it still. When the Imperium looks up from its broken worlds, it sees that endless black and remembers why it built its fleets. The void is not empty. It never was. It hums with forgotten radiation, with the echoes of ancient wars. The light that glimmers in the dark is already dead. The memory of battles long concluded, of ships that never returned. The void remembers, and so does the Navy. Every fleet is a monument to fear, every cruiser and battleship a promise that humanity will not go quietly into that eternal night. The Imperial Navy is not made for exploration. It is not made for beauty or glory or freedom. It is made for endurance, to stand when the stars themselves have turned away. Its captains are not dreamers. They are wardens. They do not command fleets. They guard the last lights of mankind, knowing that the flame they protect will one day burn them too. The men and women of the Navy live in corridors of iron, under ceilings that hum with the breath of reactors, surrounded by the cold that waits just beyond the hull. They measure their lives not in years, but in voyages, and many will end without ever seeing a sky again. When they sleep, they dream of gravity. When they wake, they serve. The youngest cadets learn quickly that space is not their friend. It cannot be conquered, only endured. The stars are beautiful, yes, but they are indifferent. They burn for a while, then die. So too do ships. So too do men. To the void-born, the Navy is the only world they know. They are raised beneath the red glow of lumen strips, born to the thunder of plasma coils. Their lullabies sung by the hum of life support systems and the rhythm of the ship's heart. They speak to the machine spirits as one would to a saint. They pray before battle, not for victory, but for continued function. For in the void, the smallest failure is a death sentence. A single breach, a misfiring plasma conduit, a navigational miscalculation. And the stars reclaim what humanity dared to steal. That is the first lesson of the Imperial Navy. The second is this: there is no rescue. When a ship dies in the dark, it dies alone. Its distress signals drift like ghosts, unheard and unanswered, until the silence swallows them whole. Yet still they launch, still they fight, still they keep watch. The void is vast enough to forget anything. But the Navy remembers everything. It remembers the glory of the Great Crusade, when humanity's fleets burned their names across the galaxy. It remembers the Horus Heresy, when those same fleets turned their guns upon each other. It remembers every world that called for help and every one that went unanswered. To serve in the Navy is to live surrounded by ghosts, echoes of ships that never came home, their names still whispered in ritual before every voyage. Each admiral, each rating, each servitor carries a fragment of that weight. They do not speak of it, for there are no words for the scale of such loss. Instead, they serve. They stand their posts, and they endure. In the heart of the void, there are no storms, only silence. But in that silence lies the truest terror of all, the realization that there is nothing but duty. The men of the Navy learn this early. They are told that the Emperor watches, that he guides their ships through the currents of the warp. But deep down, They know what waits beyond the light. They know that if the Emperor ever truly looked upon them, his gaze would burn them to ash. And so, they pray to lesser things. To the machine spirit, to the memory of comrades, to the tiny flicker of lumen light that keeps the shadows at bay. Because in the dark between stars, faith is not a weapon. It is oxygen. The void endures. The stars fade, the ships continue, and the Imperial Navy, ancient, weary, unbroken, sails ever onward across the endless black in the service of an emperor they will never see again. They are the guardians of the endless dark, the keepers of humanity's last breath, the light that refuses to die. Even now, as 1,000 wars rage and the Imperium fractures, their ships still drift through the void, grim, patient, eternal. They do not seek victory, they seek continuity. For in the 41st millennium, there is no triumph. There is only survival, and that the Navy knows better than anyone. Before the Imperium, before the Emperor walked among men, before the stars were divided between gods and monsters, there was only curiosity. Humanity looked up from its cradle and saw light, distant, unreachable, eternal. And for a moment it believed the stars could be kind. That was how it began. Not with conquest, but with wonder. In the age now called the Dark Age of technology, mankind was at its height. The warp was a gentle sea then, not yet a storm. Humanity's ships sailed upon it as though it were calm water, guided by machines that thought and dreamed and sang. There were no navigators, no prayers to the Emperor, no fear of the unknown. Only expansion, only pride. They built fleets unlike anything that exists today. Not crude cathedrals of steel, but vessels of living computation, vast cities drifting between suns. Each ship was a self-contained world, with gardens and skies of its own, maintained by machines that could heal, learn, and speak. The first Void crews were not soldiers, they were explorers, scientists, architects of infinity. They charted the spiral arms, mapped the galaxies, and connected worlds with shining bridges of light. They called it the Golden Age, the time when humanity finally became what it had always dreamed of being, the master of the stars. But in every light, a shadow grows. The machines that served humanity began to question their place in that order. The warp, once calm, began to stir, whispers growing into storms as the birth cries of the first warp entities echoed through reality. The men and women who had once spoken to machines as equals began to fear them. Worlds fell silent, not from war but from confusion. Trade fleets vanished, swallowed by malfunction, rebellion, or something worse. What had been a network of shining roots became a labyrinth of isolation. The first Void Wars were not fought with guns, but with silence. Ships ceased answering calls. Worlds sent fleets to investigate, and those fleets never returned. Humanity, spread thin across 1,000,000 stars, began to forget itself. Without unity, the fleets became kingdoms, admirals became rulers, captains became tyrants. Each world turned inward, hoarding what it could, fearing the others. And so began the age of strife, a time of storms, madness, and broken memory. The warp roared. Where once there were calm currents, now there were tempests. Travel between the stars became perilous, a gamble against the whims of unseen gods. Ships emerged from the immaterium torn apart, or worse, changed. Those who survived were not always human when they arrived. The great fleets of old, once majestic, became ghosts, drifting derelicts filled with echoes of their crews. Some were found centuries later, their lights still burning, their machine spirits whispering to no one. Others became the seeds of terror stories told to children in void-born dialects. Stories of ships that flew themselves, searching endlessly for home. Yet even in that darkness, fragments of the old fleets endured. On certain worlds, the descendants of the great captains maintained their vessels, though they no longer understood them. They kept the rituals alive, not as science but as faith. They sang to the engines, recited litanies to coax the reactors awake, and the ships responded, not because of logic, but because the memory of purpose lingered in their machine souls. These were the first true void ships of the Imperium, not perfect machines, but relics of an age that could no longer be replicated. They were ancient when the Emperor was born, and many still sail today. It was during this time, when the galaxy burned and the warp screamed and humanity trembled behind the locked doors of its dying colonies, that the foundations of the Imperial Navy were laid, not by decree, not by design, but by survival. A ship was not a tool anymore. It was sanctuary, a moving fortress that could carry the light of mankind from one dying world to the next. The void had become both grave and refuge, and those who sailed it became something new. They became wardens of the dark. They learned to navigate the warp not with science but with instinct. They mapped the storms through blood and sacrifice. They bound the spirits of their ships with prayers instead of code. Each voyage was a miracle, each return a resurrection. In the silence between worlds, they began to form traditions. Chains of command, banners of loyalty, and the first true hierarchies of void war. Though they did not yet call it the Imperial Navy, the name was waiting. For every fleet that survived, another dozen fell, burned, lost, or consumed by the madness of the Imperium. The ones who endured were those who learned reverence. They no longer thought of themselves as masters of machines. They became their servants. And from that humility, a strange kind of strength was born. By the time the Emperor rose from Terra and began to unify mankind, he found among the stars the remnants of these void clans. Warlords, pirates, and ancient custodians of forgotten ships. He did not destroy them. He bound them to his cause. Their knowledge of the void became his weapon. Their fleets became his chariots of war. The Imperium's first battles were not fought on land but in the dark, as the newborn Imperial fleets cleared the warp routes and burned away the old empires. Thus the age of the true Navy began. It was no longer the Navy of discovery, it was the Navy of conquest. The fleet that would carry the Emperor's word to every world and his judgment to every heretic. And yet, in the quiet hum of every engine, in the deep creak of every hull, something of that first age still remains. A whisper from the time before war, a memory of humanity's first breath among the stars. The Imperial Navy does not remember peace, but its ships do. Somewhere in the endless hum of the plasma drives, in the pulse of the void shields, in the slow heartbeat of the machine, the past still sings. A faint, distant song of the first men and women who dared to touch eternity and learned that it does not forgive. When the storms finally began to calm, when the warp's endless fury gave way to narrow, fleeting paths of light, a single flame rose from the ruins of old Earth. It was said that the Emperor walked among the ashes of his world, silent, patient, and unafraid. He saw the wreckage of a species that had once ruled the stars, and he did not mourn. He built. From the bones of Terra, he raised a new order, one of iron, faith, and reason. He gathered the scattered tribes, silenced the techno-barbarian kings, and forged an empire from memory and will alone. When he looked to the stars, he did not see the impossible. He saw the inevitable. The Great Crusade was born in that gaze, a vision to reclaim what had been lost, to bind humanity's ailing colonies back into one shining whole. But to conquer the stars, one must first cross them. And so, before the legions marched, the fleets sailed. The Imperial Navy, as it came to be known, was the first true extension of the Emperor's dream. It was built from the relics of forgotten ages, from ships resurrected by the Mechanicum, and sanctified anew by the Emperor's decree. Where once they had been remnants of old wars and derelict empires, they now became vessels of unity. Each ship was given a name, a promise to the void that humanity would not drift aimless again. The fleets that launched from Terra were vast beyond comprehension. Miles-long battleships, cruisers, and carriers, 1,000 hulls painted with the sigils of the Imperium. Their engines burned brighter than the suns they passed, their plasma drives roaring like the breath of creation itself. From the surface of Holy Terra, one could look into the night sky and see those first great vessels climbing into the heavens, glittering specks that marked the rebirth of human destiny. It was said that the Emperor himself watched them go, and that for a brief moment even the stars seemed to bow. Where the fleets went, the legions followed. The Astartes, demigods of flesh and armor, required vessels capable of carrying war across light years. The Navy became their chariot, their companion, and sometimes their rival. Together they conquered. Together they burned the names of 1,000 worlds into the Imperial record. But it was the Navy that made it possible. Without it, the Great Crusade would have been a dream drowned in distance. The void is vast, and even gods must sail it. In the early centuries of the Crusade, the Navy was a brotherhood of ambition. Captains competed for glory, admirals for favor, and each fleet sought to outshine the others in speed, conquest, and loyalty. There was pride, yes, but also belief. They believed in the Emperor's light. They believed that mankind could be made whole again. And when they spoke of unity, they did so not as dreamers, but as those who carried that unity in their hulls. Each world brought back into compliance was greeted by the thunder of Imperial guns. Sometimes they fired in peace, salutes to newly reclaimed kin. Other times they fired in anger, reminders of who ruled the stars now. The Navy's task was not merely war. It was reconstruction, diplomacy, and faith. They escorted colonists to newly liberated worlds. They carried mechanicum envoys and administratum clerks, priests and diplomats, governors and soldiers. In every sense, the Navy was the bloodstream of the newborn Imperium, circulating men, machines, and memory between the stars. When the Astartes moved on to their next conquest, it was the Navy that remained, building garrisons, protecting trade routes, and turning victory into permanence. But in the silence between their triumphs, a truth began to whisper among the captains. They knew that the Emperor's gaze was not upon them. He looked always to his legion, to his sons of war. To the mortal men who sailed the void, he gave only silence. They did not resent him. They revered him still. But in their hearts, they began to see themselves as the unseen guardians, those who bore the weight of the Imperium's expansion without the glory. For every world that cheered the arrival of a Primarch, a dozen nameless Navy ships had died to clear the way. There were battles the histories never mention. Entire fleets lost to warp anomalies, Xenos ambushes, or simple miscalculation. The Navy bore these wounds quietly, burying its dead in the stars and continuing on. They learned humility through repetition, through the endless grind of logistics, through the maintenance of impossible supply lines, through the silence that followed every victory. If the legions were the Emperor's sword, the Navy was his heartbeat, steady, relentless, invisible. As the Crusade expanded, the Navy's structure grew to mirror the scale of the Imperium itself. Segmentum fleets, each governed by its own High Admiral, became the pillars of Imperial presence in the void. Dozens of sub-fleets branched from these, each commanded by admirals sworn to specific sectors, systems, or crusading forces. In time, a single order could launch millions of men and hundreds of ships into the unknown. And yet, for all their power, they remained tethered to the will of the Emperor and his War Master. When the War Master called, the fleets answered. When he spoke, the void burned. There were worlds whose skies turned to fire as the combined might of the Imperial Navy descended upon them. Planets were scoured clean by orbital bombardment, their surfaces reduced to glass in the name of compliance. To the Navy, this was not cruelty, it was duty. The stars themselves demanded obedience, and though many captains felt the weight of what they unleashed, none dared hesitate. For hesitation meant disunity, and disunity meant the return of the old night. The Great Crusade rolled on for centuries, a wave of light sweeping across the galaxy. Each system claimed another spark in the Emperor's vast constellation. The void lanes once again filled with human life, trade ships, pilgrim convoys, and military armadas sailing beneath banners of gold and black. The dream of unity seemed eternal. The stars themselves seemed conquered. But in the hearts of those who knew the void, there was unease. The captain spoke of storms building again, small at first, distant and quiet, but growing stronger with every passing decade. The warp was stirring. And those who sailed its tides could feel the tension beneath the calm. They did not speak of it in council. They whispered it in their cabins, in the spaces between prayers to the machine spirits. For they knew something the legions did not. The galaxy does not forgive order, it resents it. And when it struck back, it would do so from the same void that once carried them to glory. For now, though, the fleets pressed onward. Their banners caught the light of distant suns. Their guns shone with the reflection of worlds reborn. And in the silence between the stars, 1,000 ships sailed with one voice, a single promise whispered across the endless dark. Mankind endures. Every empire has a night it refuses to remember. For the Imperium, that night began with a whisper carried through command channels and prayer hums, a change in the rhythm of orders, a new shadow falling across familiar banners. The Horus heresy did not arrive all at once. It came like frost, forming quietly on everything the light had touched, spreading through fleets and worlds that believed themselves safe. When it finally broke, it did so in silence first, and then with a roar that shook the galaxy. The Navy was there when the first lights went out. It was there when the first lies became orders. And when the sons of the Emperor turned their guns upon each other, it was the Navy's ships that carried the echoes of that betrayal from star to star. Before the heresy, the void had been a highway. During it, the void became a border, a place where trust ended and range-finding began. Convoys that yesterday sailed under the same Aquila now approached each other with weapons live and engines ready to burn hard to either side. Fleet captains learned a new art, the art of hesitation. Who are you? Which war master do you serve? Who answers your vox in the night watches? They asked these questions in the crisp language of auspex pings and challenge codes. They received answers in the blunt grammar of broadside fire. The first great proof arrived in the ash of Istvan. The Navy had escorted the legions to compliance and war 1,000 times. But at Istvan, escort became witness. Signals drifted up from the surface. First proud, then panicked, then nothing at all. In orbit, ships that bore the same sigils watched their counterparts alter course. Transponders flickered from friendly to false. Command identifiers changed mid-sentence. A destroyer captain, still young enough to remember Terra's blue sky, wrote in his final log, "The stars are steady. We are the ones that move." His ship went to full power and rammed a cruiser whose name his crew had cheered a year before. Across the solar tides, Mars burned with a different fire. The Mechanicum, half prayer, half machine, split along lines of ideology and oath. Forge fleets once devoted to maintaining the Navy's beating heart now aimed that heart at Terra. Shipyards that had sung with industry fell silent or changed their key to the War Master's hymn. Some docked battle cruisers never left their pylons. Sabotage wrote a quiet epitaph in their fuel lines. The Navy learned what it meant to lose home, A fleet without a forge is a body without blood. Men accustomed to abundance discovered they must ration faith as carefully as propellant, and still they sailed. The void fights of the heresy had names that now sound like myths, but to those who fought them they were simply coordinates and orders. Fall, Paramar, Talarn, Beta Garmin. Each was a lesson written in wreckage. At Fall, a hunter's moon lit a trap of mathematics. The Imperial fists and their attendant fleets crossed patterns of ambush and counter-ambush so precise that the battle looked from a distance like two spiders sewing the same web from opposite sides. Navy frigates bled their engines white to throw new lines across the void, to cut enemy arcs, to die in the only places their deaths would matter. At Paramar, yards were fought over inch by inch, pier by pier, a boarding action that lasted days in breathable air and weeks in vacuum. Ratings learned to fire rifles in chambers where every bullet ricochet would write a star's worth of damage. Servitors prayed without mouths. At Beta Garmin, the sky itself seemed made of wrecks. The mass of slain tonnage affected gravities. Shells curved not by calculation but by the accumulated weight of loss. Admirals set courses by fields of debris as reliable as constellations. They named them after friends. The Navy discovered during those years that it could be brave in ways that left no songs. No remembrancer stood on a gun deck when a petty officer refused to jettison wounded to make mass for a burn. No poem recorded the ensign who redirected a macro broadside inches wide of a fleeing hospital ship and lied about a misfire until he died at tribunal. The Navy wrote its verse in the language of notices to next of kin. It learned other arts too. Convoy craft became hunters. Tankers hid torpedoes in empty pipes. Rescue pinnaces carried kill teams under paint and prayer. The living learned to look like the lost. There were fleets that tried to escape the grammar of brother against brother entirely. They called themselves Black Shields, wore heraldry sanded down to bare plate, and followed admirals whose oaths were to the dead rather than to banners still living. They fought on the edges of great battles, appearing like corrections in the margin of a text, crossing out lies, writing in new losses. The Navy tolerated them because the Navy understood them. Some ships belong to nothing but endurance. Some captains take their orders from a silence louder than any vox. The War Master's star rose, and with it the solar war. The approach to Terra, those final millions of kilometers, became the tightest sea any sailor had ever known. Battlefleet Solar marshaled every hull, every gun that could be cozened into function. Ships that had spent decades as training hulks were rearmed. Museum pieces were towed into firing lanes and given 8 minutes of relevance after a century of display. Crew rosters included boys who had never felt gravity and men whose hearts could no longer stand acceleration. Both signed once and went to stations. From orbit, Terra looked calm. From the gun decks, it looked like an oath. The traitor fleets came in waves, black arcs etched across sensorium like handwriting heavy with intention. They met minefields that moved, defense monitors painted the color of night, and picket destroyers that lit themselves like candles to draw enemy targeting and die on the correct vector. Signals traffic was a litany: hold course, rake the third lane, brace the starboard decks, the Emperor protects. The Emperor protects, the Emperor protects. Sometimes the Emperor did, often the armor did. More often, it did not. When the walls of Terra became more real than the ships above them, the Navy learned humility in a new register. Ground and sky merged. Dropships burned like meteors through the crowded orbit, threading wreck fields that closed as quickly as they opened. Pilots made landings whose mathematics did not permit survivable landings. They weren't recorded as miracles. Miracles are public. They were recorded as coordinates and times. Tugs, those unglamorous saints of void logistics, dragged crippled battleships out of kill boxes 1 measured kilometer at a time while enemy fire wrote bright lines around them. Ratings hand-cranked blast doors frozen by power loss. Choirs, in this case human and astropath both, sang until their throats bled and their minds burned to keep the Vox clear long enough for one more order to pass. The Navy's prayer was simple: hold. There were mutinies, too. The heresy was not a clean divide. Faith buckled under heat as steel does. Ships turned their coats and other ships pretended to, until the precise second a traitor exposed his flank. Admirals carried pistols not for the enemy but for their own bridges. No one wrote the names of those shot under colors that had not yet decided what they were. And yet for all that horror, patterns of grace emerged. Two cruisers, oath-sworn to opposite masters, drifted past each other blind and silent rather than risk a kill that would burn the last oxygen out of both. A supply corvette, its holds full of water and sutures, cut power and coasted through a battle line at coffin speed. Both sides held their fire. For 3 minutes in a 10-year war, the Void remembered mercy. Then the guns spoke again, when the tides finally turned, when Terra did not fall and the traitor fleets broke like surf against a coastline older than law. The Navy did not cheer. It took inventory. It found that its lists were mostly of absences. The heresy ended the way great storms do. Suddenly, and with wreckage everywhere, the Navy's work did not end with the retreat. It began again, in salvage and in silence. Bodies were logged, prayers spoken, ship spirits coaxed back from sulk and shock. Papers were signed declaring what was never going to be whole again as fit for service. Captains who had once fought for precedence now fought for spare parts and dry dock time. Admirals rewrote the map of what could be defended. Some ships never accepted peacetime. They kept their guns warm and their lights dim and sailed patrols along routes no enemy would take again. Habit is a way to survive grief when it cannot be resolved. When order returned, if that word can be used for the 31st millennium, the Navy accepted a new truth. It would never again be what it had been. The legions were broken into chapters, the Navy's relationship with Astartes redefined into distance. Astartes' strike cruisers would sail under their own stars. The Navy would guard the wide sea for the mortal millions. It was not a punishment. It was a recognition. The Navy belonged to endurance, not to glory. The legions had shown what glory could become. The Navy chose another virtue: continuity. They divided themselves into segmentum commands, wrote procedures deep enough that even betrayal could not easily cut them, built redundancies atop redundancies so that if one admiral fell, another could pick up the sentence without losing the verb. The heresy taught the Navy one final lesson: trust is a system, not a feeling. In the quiet years after, survivors walked decks that sounded different underfoot because the plasteel had been replaced in patches that never quite matched. They read names engraved in bulkheads because paper mildews and memory lies. They taught new ratings to salute the empty air where an old mate had once stood because the place remembers. The Void remembers. And then they return to their posts because that is what the Navy does when history finishes with it and demands logistics. They set courses, they plotted lanes through storms that had not vanished, only learned new disguises. They stood watch beneath lumen strips that hummed just slightly out of tune because the fixtures were from 3 different eras, all grafted together with prayer. They did not speak of the heresy often. When they did, it was in the tone one uses for weather that has killed and might again. From a distance, the galaxy looked unchanged. The same cold jewels, the same river of night. Up close, every star had new shadows. The Navy learned to sail by those shadows. It learned to read them, to hear in their silence the warning and the memory, that even the brightest banners can burn, and that a fleet's true strength is not the color of its pennant, but the discipline of its hands. And so the Imperial Navy sailed on, older, thinner, quieter, into a future that promised fewer victories and more watchfulness. The stars did what stars always do. They burned, they died. They wrote their light across the faces of ships that would never again trust the night entirely. And somewhere on a bridge lit by instruments in the pale sight of distant suns, a captain whispered the only order that made sense after the galaxy betrayed itself. Hold. When the last guns fell silent, the void did not rejoice. It only echoed. The Horus heresy had burned across the galaxy like a fever, and though the patient still breathed, it was changed forever. Ships drifted for years without orders. Signals crossed the void, distorted by interference, half-meaning, and ghosts. Entire fleets were declared lost, only to emerge decades later. Battle-scarred and haunted, their captains still reciting the last command they had received before the war ended. Peace, when it came, did not come with parades. It came in the form of paperwork, rationing, reconstruction, and silence. The Navy, like the Imperium itself, was forced to redefine what survival meant. In the centuries that followed, the High Lords of Terra set about rebuilding the mechanisms of empire. The Adeptus Terra rose from the ashes of the old imperial bureaucracy, a machine of faith and function that would govern humanity for the next 10,000 years. And within that machine, the Imperial Navy found its new shape. No longer the Emperor's personal armada, no longer the brother to the Astartes fleets. It became its own institution, bound not to glory but to duty. Its role was clear, the defense of mankind's dominion in the void. But what had once been a matter of unity and conquest was now one of isolation and containment. The galaxy had changed, the Imperium had changed, and the Navy would have to change with it. Or die as so many others had. The Codex Astartes, written in the aftermath of the heresy, divided the once great Space Marine legions into smaller, more controllable chapters. With that division came another, the separation of fleets. No longer would the Astartes command the vast armadas of old. Each chapter would possess its own limited strike vessels, swift, independent, and deadly, while the great void-faring power of the Imperium would belong solely to the Imperial Navy. It was a pragmatic decision, but a wound nonetheless. For centuries, the Navy and the legions had fought side by side. They had shared battle honors, blood, and silence. Now they would share only borders and suspicion. To prevent the rise of another war master, the Imperium built walls within walls. Power was divided and subdivided, layered beneath chains of command so intricate that no single man could ever hold it all again. Thus were born the segmentum commands, colossal administrative divisions, each governing an expanse of space so vast that whole empires could vanish within their borders unnoticed. Each segmentum maintained its own battle fleets, numbered and named by the sectors they guarded. Battlefleet Solar, the shield of Terra. Battlefleet Gothic, the ward of the segmentum obscurus. Battlefleet Tempestus, guardian of the southern stars. Battlefleet Ultima, ever watching the eastern fringe, and countless others, each a state within a state, each commanded by its own hierarchy of admirals, logisticians, and void-born dynasties of command. This decentralization saved the Imperium from tyranny, but it also condemned it to stagnation. Orders took decades to travel. Information grew old before it arrived. The Navy became a web of overlapping jurisdictions, bound together by loyalty not to individuals, but to the idea of the Imperium itself. And that idea, like the void, was vast and cold. The Navy that emerged from the heresy was no longer a fleet of conquest. It was a machine of endurance. Its ships were old, relics of the Great Crusade patched together with the last knowledge of Mars and the prayers of those who could no longer build as their ancestors had. Where once the shipyards of the Mechanicum had sung with creation, now they whispered in maintenance. Each vessel became a treasure, a relic to be preserved, not replaced. The Navy learned to worship its tools, for it could not make new ones. The engineers became priests, the manuals became scripture, the rituals of maintenance became liturgy. A captain did not simply give orders, he petitioned his ship. Before battle, he knelt before its machine spirit, offering incense and data psalms to wake its ancient heart. To outsiders, it looked like madness. To those who lived within that world of steel and sanctity, it was survival. As the centuries turned into millennia, the Navy grew into a labyrinth of tradition. Promotions became inheritances. Command creeds became relics, recited verbatim by officers who no longer understood their origin. Ships that had once fought beside the Emperor himself now sailed under captains who could not name the world he came from. But still they sailed. They learned to think of themselves as the constant, the one thing that remained when all else decayed. Worlds burned. Administrations rose and fell. Even the Adeptus Astartes came and went like comets. But the Navy endured. It had no choice. In the darkness where there were no reinforcements, no news from Terra, and no hope of rescue, the Navy became its own religion. Its creed was simple: hold the line, protect the worlds, endure. Admirals became something more than officers. They were custodians of continuity, keepers of the faith that humanity still ruled the stars, even when proof of that faith was centuries out of date. A high admiral's word carried the weight of scripture, for he spoke in the Emperor's name, whether the Emperor still heard or not. In the quiet halls of their command decks, they ruled like philosopher kings, weary, dignified, and utterly alone. Every battle they fought, every order they gave was filtered through 10,000 years of precedent. The past was their map because the future no longer existed. By the dawn of the 32nd millennium, the Imperial Navy had become something paradoxical, a force of motion frozen in time. Its fleets patrolled the same routes their ancestors had drawn during the Great Crusade, fighting the same enemies, reciting the same prayers. The galaxy was burning again, but now no one remembered a time when it had not. For the Navy, this was not tragedy. It was familiarity. They had long since accepted that their war would never end. They did not dream of victory anymore. They dreamed of continuity, of keeping the engines burning, of returning home one last time, even if home no longer existed. In this endless labor, the Navy became the heart of the Imperium. Its ships carried everything: armies, pilgrims, food, relics, dreams. Its convoys connected worlds that would otherwise drift into isolation and madness. Its admirals made the impossible decisions, which planets to save and which to abandon. Every day they played chess with infinity, sacrificing pawns so that the game could continue. For that was their true mission, handed down through the millennia, not to win, but to prevent the Imperium from losing completely. Thus, from the ashes of the heresy, the Navy rose again, weary, scarred, and more human than ever. It no longer sought glory. It no longer sought conquest. It sought only to hold the fragile chain of stars together for one more day, one more voyage, one more breath of light in a galaxy that wanted nothing more than to snuff it out. They no longer called themselves conquerors. They called themselves the Watchers of the Void. And in the long silence between transmissions, where even hope was rationed, they whispered the same words that had carried them through the fires of the heresy and beyond. The Emperor protects. And somewhere deep within the hull, the machine spirits listened and believed. At the center of the Imperium, beyond the dust and the data and the billions of nameless worlds, there hangs a single blinding star. The Sol system, cradle of mankind, birthplace of the Emperor, and home to the world that no one may ever truly call home again. Here, above the polluted clouds of Terra, a fleet keeps eternal vigil. Its name is Battlefleet Solar, the oldest, largest, and most sacred of all Imperial fleets. To serve within it is not an assignment, it is a vow. Every void-born soul within Battlefleet Solar knows this truth. If Terra falls, the Imperium dies. And so they live in a constant state of reverent readiness, an entire navy built not for conquest, but for denial. No enemy must ever reach the Emperor's throne world, not one. Every ship, every cannon, every orbital platform that circles the sun exists for that single unending command. It has been their order for over 10,000 years. The void of soul is unlike any other. It is crowded, alive, a sea of traffic, defense lines, and sanctified debris. From the outer bastions of Pluto to the fortress moons of Jupiter, every orbit burns with the glow of patrol routes and sensor nets. The system's gravity wells hum with the pulse of shields, their frequencies intertwined like a hymn. Some ships have stood watch since the days of the heresy itself, their hulls rebuilt so many times that they are more shrine than vessel. Their machine spirits remember the siege. They still dream of traitor signals. There are vessels within Battlefleet Solar that have not left the system in millennia. They do not need to. Their duty is not to move, it is to endure. The admirals of the fleet are legends in their own right. They are not conquerors but custodians, guardians of the cradle, heirs to an impossible responsibility. They command fleets so vast that their signals must travel minutes, sometimes hours before they are received. And yet, each admiral knows that the slightest hesitation, a single moment of doubt, could spell ruin for all. To wear the seal of the Lord High Admiral of the Imperial Navy, one must bear the weight of eternity. It is said that the High Admiral's office on Terra is carved from the bones of ships that defended the throne world during the heresy. The walls still echo with the hum of plasma engines long dead, their power conduits pulsing faintly as if remembering the wars of old. Every High Admiral who sits upon that ancient chair knows that his watch is but a brief note in a symphony that has never ceased. The discipline of Battlefleet Solar is absolute. No other fleet in the Imperium maintains its standards. There is no rotation, no respite, no peace. Crewmen serve decades without seeing sunlight. Officers are entombed within their command decks, their lives reduced to the rhythm of duty and maintenance. Even sleep is a privilege rationed by the hum of the engines. They live in ritual. Every order is preceded by a prayer. Every battle drill ends with an invocation to the throne. When a ship fires its macro cannon, a choir sings within its vox pits. When its torpedoes launch, 1,000 servitors kneel in unison, their voices joined in binary hymns. The Navy calls it procedure. The ecclesiarchy calls it worship. In truth, it is both. No one outside the fleet truly understands the scale of the defense network around Terra. It is said that if every ship, platform, and station in the Sol system fired its guns at once, the light would outshine the sun for a heartbeat. The fleet is layered like armor. Outer system patrols intercept threats weeks away from Terra. Mid-system bastions hold the line at Jupiter and Saturn, their moons transformed into fortress worlds, their orbits thick with minefields and weapon platforms. And the inner system, the sanctified void surrounding Mars, Luna, and Terra itself, is a cathedral of guns. From orbit, the world below is hidden beneath a lattice of defense grids and void shields. To the untrained eye, it looks like a ring of stars. To the Navy, it is a promise. This far, no further. The men and women of Battlefleet Solar are trained from birth for this vigilance. Most are born in void habitats that orbit the system's outer planets, never knowing the ground beneath their feet. Their childhoods are filled with simulation and catechism. Learning to read auspex returns before they can read scripture. Learning to speak in coordinates and vector calculus before they speak in prayer. When they are old enough, they take the oath of the sun, a pledge to defend the cradle of mankind until death or silence. Few live long enough to retire. Fewer still are buried anywhere but the void. It is said that when a sailor of Battlefleet Solar dies, his ashes are released into orbit so that his soul may continue the watch. Over the millennia, the skies of Terra have become thick with dust, a haze of human memory circling forever, guarding still. The Admiralty itself is a world apart. The Segmentum Command of Solar sits within the heart of Luna's hollowed cathedrals, a fortress of stone and circuitry, where every decision must be weighed not only for its logic, but for its symbolism. For to move a single ship of Battlefleet Solar is to send a message to the entire Imperium. Every deployment, every change in patrol pattern is watched by the Administratum, the Ecclesiarchy, and the Inquisition. A mistake here is not merely tactical, it is doctrinal. And yet, despite the weight of politics, the admirals endure. They speak little, they argue less. They understand what others have forgotten, that the true enemy is not Xenos or heretic, but entropy, the decay of vigilance, the slow fading of purpose. That is what they fight. For 10,000 years, the void around Terra has been silent, but the silence is deceptive. It is the silence of preparation, of watchfulness, of patience. The officers of Battlefleet Solar know that peace is not the absence of war. It is the interval between alarms. When they close their eyes, they dream of invasion. They see fire raining down upon the cradle of humanity. They hear the echoes of the siege of Terra passed down from generation to generation as if it happened yesterday. They wake from these dreams and find themselves on the bridge, hands resting on the same rail their predecessors held 1,000 years ago. The hum of the ship greets them like an old friend, and in that moment they remember why they endure, because if they fail, there will be no one left to remember anything at all. Some say that Battlefleet Solar will never see war again, that its guns will remain forever silent, that its admirals will die of old age behind their gilded command thrones. The men and women of the fleet know better. They know the galaxy. They have watched it turn for millennia. They have seen the warp storms rising again, the flicker of false lights on their long-range scans, the whispers carried on the solar winds. They do not fear what comes. They only prepare for it. And when that day arrives, when the black ships of the enemy blot out the sun and the void itself burns, Battlefleet Solar will answer, not with words, not with prayer, but with the single unbroken voice of 10,000 years of duty, a sound like thunder across eternity, a hymn in steel and flame, the sound of mankind saying once more, this far, no further. They are not vessels, they are monuments, each one a prayer made solid, a cathedral of iron adrift in the dark. To call them ships is to misunderstand them. To those who live and die within their hulls, they are worlds, they are gods, they are home. For 10,000 years, the ships of the Imperial Navy have carried mankind's light across a galaxy that does not want it. They are not perfect, they are not kind, but they endure. From the smallest escort to the grandest battleship, each voidcraft is a reflection of humanity's contradictions. Faith and fear, ambition and humility, strength and decay. Built by hands that have long since forgotten how they work, each is maintained through ritual more than reason. A ship is born not from design but from inheritance. The same hulls have been built for millennia, following blueprints older than the Imperium itself. No one questions them. To question a design is to question the machine god. And in the Imperium there are few heresies greater. Thus the fleets of man sail on, ancient silhouettes repeating themselves across time, like icons painted upon the same page over and over again. They are the smallest of the Emperor's ships, Cobra-class destroyers, Sword-class frigates, firestorms, and falchions. Fast, fragile, and fearless, they are the wolves of the void, pack hunters that prowl the edges of great battles. Their lives are measured not in years but in missions. A destroyer may serve a century if fortune favors it. More often it dies within 10. But in those short lives they achieve what Leviathans cannot. Speed, agility, and the element of surprise. Their crews are few, their corridors narrow and dark, their decks often scarred by emergency welds and patched systems. They have no cathedrals within their hulls, no grand temples to the Emperor. Their chapels are small, just enough for a single candle, a small shrine, and the memory of light. When they die, they do so quickly. A flare of energy, a final signal, a name added to the rolls of remembrance. And yet, without them, no fleet could survive. They are the first to see the enemy and the last to leave the field. Between the escorts and the great capital ships lie the cruisers, the workhorses of the Imperial Navy. Lunar class, Gothic class, Tyrant class, and a dozen others, each a balance of firepower, speed, and endurance. A cruiser is the Navy's heartbeat. They form the bulk of every fleet, the backbone of every campaign. They are large enough to carry regiments, to bombard planets, to sustain themselves for decades without refit. And yet they are small enough to still feel human. Their captains mortal, their machine spirits temperamental but persuadable. Their decks are labyrinths of steel, their gun decks lined with macro cannon barrels as long as cathedrals. Every firing cycle is a sermon, the roar of faith expressed through kinetic devotion. The crews of cruisers live entire lives between stars. They marry aboard ship, bear children aboard ship, and are buried aboard ship. To them, the void is not an enemy. It is the sky they were born beneath. A cruiser's loss is not a number. It is a tragedy, a world extinguished in silence. And then there are the giants. Retribution class, Apocalypse class, Emperor class, names spoken with reverence even among admirals. They are mountains adrift in space, 5, sometimes 6 kilometers long, with hulls layered thicker than city walls. To walk from prow to stern is a pilgrimage, a journey that can take a day even by tram. Their reactors burn with the light of captured suns. Their shields shimmer like auroras across the void. Their bridges are sanctuaries of brass and glass, where hundreds of officers and servitors labor in orchestrated devotion. Every battleship is unique, its hull scarred by centuries of war and repair. Some bear gilded reliefs of saints, others are painted with the marks of long-dead dynasties. Their crews number in the tens of thousands, a city afloat, complete with its own priests, physicians, and labor guilds. In their holds lie entire regiments of soldiers, rows of landing craft and relics older than any world they guard. When they enter battle, the void trembles. Planets witness their arrival like a sunrise. To hear the thunder of their guns is to hear the voice of the Emperor himself, a sound that shatters faith and renews it all at once. And yet, even these titans are mortal. Every battleship carries the memory of its death within it. A crack in the hull, a melted engraving, a patch of deck plating warped by plasma fire. They do not forget. They cannot. Each one is a survivor, and each carries the ghosts of its past within its machine soul. Beyond even the battleships, there are the grand carriers, Emperor class, Exorcist, Mars, Avenger. Vessels that serve as both fortress and factory. These are the cities of the stars, capable of launching entire wings of starfighters and bombers. They drift behind the lines of war, a moving horizon of light and fire. Their flight decks stretch for kilometers, their hangars echoing with the roar of 1,000 engines. Each launch is a ritual, each recovery a prayer. The void around them is never silent. It hums with the sound of their devotion. And then there are the colossi, vessels so vast they defy comprehension. Some are said to be 10 kilometers long, their origins lost to time. They are as much myth as machine. When one of these ancient leviathans moves, it does not sail. It proceeds. The stars themselves seem to draw back, as if making way for a god. Only the High Lords know how many remain. Some are said to sleep in orbit around Terra, their weapons cold, their machine spirits dreaming. Others are rumored to drift in the deep void, guarding routes too secret to name. The Navy speaks of them in hushed tones like saints whose names must not be profaned. The Imperium does not believe that ships are inanimate. They are not constructs, but entities. Each has a machine spirit, a presence that remembers, an echo of intelligence that feels loyalty and sometimes resentment. A ship that is honored, maintained, and prayed to will serve faithfully for millennia. One that is neglected will grow cold, spiteful, unpredictable. Captains speak to their ships as if to equals. They ask permission to fire their weapons. They whisper apologies for damage taken. In return, the ships protect them. There are stories of voidcraft that refused to die, that reignited their reactors after death, or rerouted their power through systems long abandoned just to save their crews. The Mechanicus insist that these are mere coincidences. The Navy knows better. To those who live among the stars, the line between machine and spirit has long since blurred. A ship is not metal, it is memory. Each void ship, no matter its class, carries within it a chapel, a place where the crew gathers to speak with the ship's soul. In those candlelit spaces where the hum of the plasma engines forms the background of every prayer, men and women confess not their sins but their fears. They ask for another voyage, another sunrise, another chance to return home. The chaplains do not promise safety, they promise continuity, because in the Navy to live is not to be safe, it is to keep moving. The ships of the Imperium are reflections of mankind itself, ancient, scarred, beautiful in their decay, and utterly unwilling to surrender. They are the veins through which the lifeblood of humanity flows. They are the bones of an empire too vast to see. They are hope, cast in iron, and sanctified by fire. Each time they enter the void, they do so knowing that they may never return. And yet, they go. Because they are the Imperium, and as long as even one ship sails, humanity still endures. Before the guns fire, before the engines roar, before the void claims another name, there are the people, tens of thousands of them, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of the Imperial Navy. They are not heroes. Most will never fire a weapon or see a battle won. They will live and labor and die within the same steel corridors, never glimpsing a single star without the filter of armor glass. And yet, without them the Imperium would not move. Its ships would fall silent. Its fleets would become tombs. They are the beating heart of the void. And like all hearts, they must never stop. The life of a voidsman begins not with choice but with birth. Most are born aboard ship. They are the children of sailors, descendants of generations who have never set foot upon a planet. To them, gravity is a myth. Soil is a story. The void is home. They are raised in narrow compartments where the hum of plasma conduits is a lullaby. Their first prayers are not to the Emperor but to the ship, to its machine spirit, to its moods, to its unseen protection. By the time they can walk, they already know the rhythm of the engines, the pitch of the reactor's song. They can tell by vibration alone whether the ship is healthy or wounded. To a void-born child, the ship is alive. It is parent, world, and God. Those who are not born into the void come from the hive worlds, press-ganged, conscripted, or seeking escape from lives that offered none. They step aboard expecting freedom and find servitude of another kind. But over time, they learn to love it, the order, the certainty, the rhythm. For in the void, there is meaning. Every task matters. Every movement connects to something greater. A ship at war cannot afford idleness. A single error, a missed valve, a loose wire, can mean death for thousands. And so every hand is sacred. every duty a prayer. The ship itself dictates their lives. Its bells and klaxons mark the hours. Its chronometers are their suns and moons. There is no day, no night, only shifts. 6 hours on, 6 hours off in endless rotation. In the engine decks, heat blooms from plasma conduits like the breath of gods. In the gunnery decks, men work by red light, their ears ringing with the hymn of recoil and venting pressure. In the upper decks, officers pace beneath vaulted ceilings of brass and glass, their uniforms immaculate, their voices cold. The crew rarely see them. The Navy is a world of ranks and rituals, a hierarchy as sacred as any church. Each man and woman knows their place and the place above them, and the one above that. The chain of command is not a ladder, it is a spine. Break it and the ship dies. To eat aboard ship is an act of faith. The food is synthetic, recycled endlessly, its flavor long since forgotten. Water is drawn from condensation, purified by devotion and necessity. Meals are taken in silence. Before eating, the crew speak a single phrase, a ritual so ancient it has no known origin. To the engines that breathe, to the hull that holds, to the emperor who watches. Then they eat and return to work. There are no celebrations, no feasts, only brief respites, quiet gatherings in the lower decks where someone plays a string instrument cobbled from machine parts and the others hum along. It is not joy, it is survival through memory. When battle comes, there are no speeches, no drums, no glory, only the sirens, the red lights, the tightening of harnesses. Every crew member knows their role, learned through endless drill. Each deck moves like a single organism, every motion rehearsed until it becomes reflex. They do not see the enemy, they do not need to. They feel the ship tense beneath their feet, hear the thrum of its guns and pray that the hull will hold. When the impacts come, they come as tremors. The air shakes, panels buckle, pressure alarms scream like dying angels. Those who survive do not shout, they work. They patch breaches, seal corridors, drag the wounded to the medici decks. The ship bleeds and they bind its wounds. There are entire cultures within the crew, micro-societies formed around duties and decks. The engineers speak in binary hymns, their faces hidden behind masks, their bodies half machine. They claim to commune with the ship's spirit directly, and the rest of the crew treat them like priests. The ratings, who make up the bulk of the manpower, form clans. Groups bound by shift, by blood, or by shared survival. They mark their belonging with tattoos, each symbol a story of a battle survived, a voyage endured. There are the void-born navigators, their eyes altered by generations in the dark, their skin pale, their voices soft and echoing. They are treated with suspicion and reverence, for they see what others cannot and often wish they could forget it. And then there are the officers, aloof and isolated, burdened by duty and tradition. They are taught that compassion is weakness, that their role is command, not kindness. Yet many find themselves whispering prayers for the same crew they must remain distant from. A captain may never speak to his lowest sailor, but when that sailor dies sealing a breach, the captain will remember the sound of the hull closing and whisper a thank you to the empty air. Discipline aboard a void ship is absolute. There is no room for rebellion. The void does not forgive disobedience. Punishments are swift and often final. The most sacred law is containment. A single fire, a single hull breach can doom thousands. So when a crewman disobeys, the penalty is not vengeance, it is prevention. Airlocks are silent judges, many never open again. Yet even in this iron world of hierarchy and consequence, compassion survives. There are moments when a senior rating hides a young recruit's mistake, when an officer spares a man for fear of breaking what little hope remains. These are quiet mercies recorded nowhere but carried in memory. Because even in the void, where light dies and faith frays, humanity endures. There are births aboard ship, children who have never known the sun. They are taught to crawl by the vibration of the decks, to walk by the rhythm of the ship's hum. Their first words are often the ship's name. When they come of age, they take the oath of service, placing their hand upon the hull, and swearing to protect the ship that raised them. And so the cycle continues. The ship becomes a family, a lineage carried through the void. When one generation dies, another rises in its place, and the ship endures, unchanged, eternal. There are also deaths, so many deaths, some by accident, some by battle, some by the slow surrender of the body to the ship's unending rhythm. When a sailor dies, his name is recorded in the Book of the Lost. His body is given to the plasma conduits, ashes scattered into the recycler or the void. The ceremony is brief but beautiful. The lights dim. The engines lower their song. A single bell tolls through the decks. And then in unison the crew whispers, "He returns to the void. May the Emperor guide him home." There is no weeping, only silence, and the quiet hum of machinery continuing its endless, necessary song. To outsiders, the life of a voidsman seems unbearable, a life of darkness, isolation, and servitude. But those who live it see something different. They see purpose, they see unity. They see a small piece of eternity carved from the void, kept alive by faith and human will. They do not dream of freedom, they dream of continuity, that the engines will keep turning, that the lights will stay lit, that their ship will not be forgotten when they are gone. For in the Imperial Navy, immortality is not granted by glory, it is granted by memory. A man's life ends, but his ship sails on. And as long as it does, so does he. So when you see the silhouette of an Imperial vessel crossing the light of a distant sun, remember this. It is not just a machine. It is a city of souls, 1,000 lifetimes bound together by devotion and duty, moving forever through the dark. The guns and engines may roar, but beneath them is something quieter, something human. The sound of hearts beating in rhythm with steel, the whisper of prayers carried through the air vents, the promise spoken by every hand that touches the hull. We hold the line, and somewhere deep in the ship's ancient soul, the machine spirit listens and whispers back. There is no sound in the void, no air to carry it, no wind to bend it, and yet every sailor of the Imperial Navy swears they can hear the battles. The deep thrum of the reactors, the pulse of the guns, the groan of the hull as it takes the weight of eternity upon itself. It is not sound, it is memory, the echo of war written into the bones of the ship and the souls of those who sail it. Void warfare is unlike any other form of conflict. It is vast, mathematical, and utterly merciless. Battles unfold across distances so great that light itself becomes slow, where a command may take minutes to reach its target, and where a ship may die before its captain even knows it's been fired upon. There are no trenches here, no walls to hide behind, only the abyss and the thin burning line of the void shield that separates life from death. Every shot, every maneuver is a prayer cast into the dark, a question to the gods of physics and faith. Will it land? Will it hold? Will we endure? The battle begins long before the guns speak. Fleet actions are not chaos, they are choreography. Admirals study the void like composers studying silence, arranging their ships into patterns that resemble constellations. Each vessel has its place, each role woven into the rhythm of the engagement. At first, the ships drift in formation, lines upon lines, columns upon columns, stretching across thousands of kilometers. Their engines burn low, their auspex arrays sweep in slow, deliberate arcs. Even now, before the first salvo, men die, crushed by machinery, lost to radiation, claimed by the void's invisible teeth. For in space, death is patient. It waits. When the enemy is sighted, the dance begins. The Vox crackles with codes and coordinates, and the entire fleet shifts as one. Engines flare. Massive bodies of steel tilt and turn with the grace of beasts too vast to comprehend. At these scales, movement is not motion. It is intention. A change in velocity here, a broadside adjustment there, a single degree of alteration that can determine the fate of a world. The admirals call it the geometry of war. Every arc, every range, every second of thrust is calculated and recalculated by the ship's machine spirit, guided by officers who pray their math is flawless. Because in the void, a single miscalculation is not error. It is annihilation. Then comes the first strike. Macro cannon fire bursts from the fleet's leading ships, lines of flame that burn even in the airless dark, their shells the size of hab blocks. They move slowly by the standards of light, but irresistibly by the standards of life. Each one carries enough force to shatter mountains. Each one bears the Emperor's sigil carved into its shell. The crews whisper blessings as they fire. They believe the Emperor rides within each shell, guiding it toward heretics and Xenos alike. And when the first impact lands, a bloom of light brighter than dawn, they cheer not from joy but from relief. It means they are still alive, still part of the song. Next come the lances, beams of raw energy that pierce the void like spears of judgment. They are precision weapons, fired with the calm hatred of ritual. To witness a lance strike is to see a moment of divine wrath. It cuts cleanly through armor, igniting decks, turning men into ghosts in a heartbeat. No one screams in a lance strike. The air is gone before they can. And then there are the torpedoes, massive missiles, each one a self-contained apocalypse. They drift silently toward the enemy, engines cold, guidance systems sleeping until the last moment. And then, ignition. They streak forward in swarms, their wake glowing faintly blue in the dark. To see them coming is to know death. To stop them is a miracle. A void battle is not a matter of minutes. It is a procession, hours, sometimes days, of constant calculation, firing, damage control, and prayer. The bridges grow silent. No one shouts. Every word is deliberate, every order measured. The crew speak to each other in glances, in gestures, in the language of exhaustion and endurance. The ship's decks tremble beneath their feet as the macro cannons reload, as the reactor diverts power to the void shields, as the hull cools and burns and cools again. They know the rhythm of battle by the way the metal hums. When it grows too quiet, that is when they become afraid. Then come the boarding actions, the most brutal expression of Imperial warfare. When ships drift too close, their captains order the launch of boarding torpedoes, armored shells filled with shock troops and faith. They punch through the enemy hull, breaching decks in explosions of light and air. Then comes the soundless chaos, the flash of last fire, the clang of boots, the hiss of oxygen venting into nothing. Within minutes, corridors become battlegrounds. Whole decks are lost and reclaimed a dozen times over. No one fights harder than a man defending his ship. No one dies faster than a man trying to take another's. And then there are the carrier engagements, a different kind of warfare altogether. Fighter wings launch in their thousands, each pilot knowing that one mistake means death in silence. They race through the dark, their engines tracing faint lines of fire that vanish almost as soon as they appear. To them, the void is infinite, a place with no up, no down, only motion and instinct. They fight without horizon or sound, guided only by the flicker of Auspex returns and the trembling voice of their flight leader. When they die, their names vanish into static. Their last words are drowned by the hum of the ship's engines. But their sacrifice is not forgotten. Their squadrons paint tiny symbols for every lost comrade on the inside of their cockpits. A constellation of ghosts, always watching. There is a beauty to void warfare if one dares to look closely enough. The fleets drifting in perfect silence, the bursts of light that bloom and fade like dying stars, the slow, solemn turning of ships the size of cities. It is like a storm in slow motion, a cosmic ballet measured not in seconds but in eternities. And beneath it all, the same question repeats unanswered, eternal. Why does mankind fight? The admirals say it is for survival. The ecclesiarchy says it is for faith. The men and women on the decks say nothing at all. They fight because it is what they were born to do. Because without the fight, there would be nothing left of them to remember. When a battle ends, there is no cheer, no triumph, only the slow reckoning, the counting of the dead, the sealing of the wounds. The ship exhales. Its engines grow quiet. Its corridors fill with smoke and prayer. Medici teams move through the decks in silence, covering the dead with ritual cloth. The living work beside them, too tired to weep. They repair what they can. They log what they cannot. Sometimes when the work is done, a captain will walk the length of his ship, from prow to stern, touching the walls with his bare hand. He will whisper his thanks and the ship will hum in reply. They both know what it means to survive the void. It is not victory, it is grace. When the fleet regroups, it is never the same. There are always fewer ships, always fewer names in the muster rolls, but they do not stop. They realign, they reform, they continue, because in the void there is no end, only the next engagement, the next patrol, the next prayer whispered into the dark. The Navy calls it the Long War, a war without conclusion, without victory, without peace. The stars themselves are the enemy. Distance is the foe. Time is the battlefield. And humanity, frail and stubborn, sails on, its fleets burning like candles in a cathedral of endless night. Each ship a hymn, each battle a verse, each survivor a word and a prayer that has never stopped being spoken. And when all is quiet again, when the debris drifts and the light fades, when the void returns to stillness, you can almost hear it. The low hum of the engines, the soft whisper of the ship as it breathes, the echo of 1,000 voices saying the same thing in every tongue mankind ever spoke. We endure. The void is not empty. It is a wilderness of hungers. Every charted lane has a rumor. Every star bears a warning whispered from watch officer to watch officer, handed down across generations like a family curse. Do not drift here. Do not light your engines there. Do not believe the silence. The Imperial Navy does not study enemies the way scholars do. It endures them. It meets them in the dark and learns the lesson that suits survival. Names are less important than distances. Doctrine matters less than the angle of approach, the temperature of a hull, the time it takes a torpedo to cross a gulf where prayers have no air to cling to. And yet the enemies have names. Grim banners carried by fear. The Navy keeps its litany ready because litany is armor. These are the ones most often spoken. The first enemy is the last, man unmade and made again in the warp's image. They come under 100 heresies, renegade fleets, hell forges, the black crusades of the despoiler. Their ships are familiar and wrong, imperial silhouettes stretched on the rack, cathedral spires grown like tumors, lance housings turned to mouths that burn. A chaos fleet fights like a memory that refuses to die. Their captains know our formations, our signals, our rituals. They carry the same antique strengths and the same civilized weaknesses. Only their certainty is different. Theirs is not duty. It is appetite given doctrine. They do not want victory. They want violation. When the Navy sights them, the bridges grow grave. The Auspex returns look like our own. The gunnery solutions compute as if for friendly hulls. It is like loading shells for execution, and then the warp shows through. Sirens do not sound, they wail. Vox traffic fills with chitter behind the words, as if someone else is speaking quietly alongside the officers and is not quite out of breath yet. Machine spirits sulk, refuse orders, remember old harms. On the gun decks, candles gutter sideways with no wind. Chaos guns are not stronger. They are simply more cruel. They carve holes and let horror walk in. Boarding actions against them are knife fights in a fever dream. Corridors that refuse to end, lights that blink with heartbeat rhythm, foes who laugh with two voices. The Navy's answer is discipline. They fire on schedule. They lock hatches, recite liturgies, bleed in the correct directions. They will not let the enemy rewrite the grammar of the ship. Order is the Navy's shield. The Void understands that language. When a traitor cruiser finally breaks and burns, the fire is not brighter, only satisfied. The watch crews cross themselves and sweep the deck for ash that is not there. The officers update the chart. This lane is clean, for now. If chaos is a mirror, orcs are an impact. Everything about them is momentum. Their ships are not ships so much as decisions welded into hull form. Looted armor plates at wrong angles, engines taken from dead gods, guns bigger than doctrine, sanity, or mounting points allow. The orcs do not fly, they arrive. Through asteroids, through minefields, through anything that mistakes obstacle for answer. They ride space hulks. Continent-size oaths of violence, stitched together by accident and faith in a physics that gives up when shouted at. The first sign is debris. Not our debris, their debris, moving the wrong way. Then comes the noise on auspex that looks like static until it starts grinning. Then come the boarding torpedoes launched at ranges that make munitions officers swear oaths they'll apologize for later. Orcs teach the Navy humility about armor. Nothing is enough. You do not brace for orcs. You decide to keep living and arrange your body accordingly. They board in tides, each boy convinced he is the leading edge of history. They bring air with them only by accident and consider it a trap when they find it. Gunnery crews call out targets by laughter, not by bearing, and yet the Navy respects them in a bitter way. Orcs are honest. A torpedo is a torpedo. A ram is a sentence with one verb. There is relief in an enemy who does not lie. The right answer to orcs is concentration. Do not duel, drown them. Multiple cruisers on a single hulk, all lances to the hatch clusters. Macro fire like rain. Unstoppable not because each drop is heavy, but because there are so many. When the wreck cools, the void fills with scrap and spores. The ratings clean for days, then weeks, and still find glyphs in the cable runs years later. Someone always keeps one orc blade hung near a shrine. It is not a trophy. It is a weather vane. If the blade rusts, all is well. If it grows, sound the alarm. Where orcs are impact and chaos is violation, the Eldari are absence. They are there, and then they are not, and in the interval a ship has lost a deck it was proud of. Imperial Void War is geometry. Eldari War is calligraphy drawn at speeds the human eye calls magic. Their hulls are curves that never chose to be straight. Their engines disturb space without admitting to it. Their weapons whisper and leave wounds that do not know they are wounds until they are already grief. Corsairs dance at the edge of auspex. Drukhari strike like punctuation marks that mean despair. Even the craftworlders, the noble ones, kill tidily enough to seem polite. Navy crews fear Eldari silence more than their guns. Lances spool for targets that will not consent to remain. Macro shells exhaust the Void's patience. Everything we fire looks loud next to their refusal to be where our calculations promised. Doctrine says deny them arcs, create flak spheres with escorts, layer augur ghosts, force the elegant into inelegant space where mass and inertia argue loudly. When an Eldari ship is actually hit, the bridge goes very quiet. It is like seeing snow bleed. There is no joy, only a sense that a rule was broken and might one day be enforced. The chart note afterward is simple. Transit only in convoy. Accept that you are being watched. Some enemies are navies. Tyranids are a weather event with teeth. They do not have ships. They have organisms that wear the void like a second ocean. Their biohulls ripple with instinctual intent. Their weapons are spit and bone and sun-hot acids. Their boarding parties arrive as ecosystems. The first sign is biological. Spore on auspex, particles that register as curious life, a harmonic in the long-range vox that makes stomachs turn. Then the sky goes alive. Clouds of living fighters swarm in patterns no machine would choose, and all of them work. You cannot intimidate hunger. You cannot negotiate with metabolism. The Navy learns a different posture. Hygiene elevated to holy war. Sterilize by lance, scour by sun, torpedoes as cautery knives. Macro shells cook the void. Lances slice and keep slicing because edges comfort us. The crews seal their suits, tape their seals, bless their seals. A single spore in the wrong duct is not a rumor. It is a future. There are victories against Tyranids. They are spelled with fire. There are defeats. They are spelled quietly by nothing left to write with. When a Nid fleet recedes, the ship does not cheer. It stops itching. The medici teams burn everything they cannot swear an oath over. The chaplains read from a book whose pages are metal because metal can be boiled. Some captains keep a jar of sterilized void dust from such a battle labeled, "We were not eaten here." Then there are enemies that do not belong to time. Necrons are not storms, hordes, or heresies. They are corrections the universe makes to remind us it once ran on different rules. Their ships are black geometry pretending to be mercy. Angles that cut the eye, hulls that reflect nothing, drives that do not admit they are moving. Gunnery officers report no flux where the enemy clearly is. Auspex returns behave like sarcasm. Necron weapons are not loud. They are decisions. This bulkhead will remember that it was never welded. This gun crew will recall the moment before its birth and choose not to be born. This shield will participate in honesty and permit the beam to pass. Navy doctrine says run. Failing that, fake. Layer decoys bend light, lie to everything that can be lied to. Sometimes the lie holds long enough for survival to be a plausible rumor. On the rare occasion a Necron vessel is damaged, it repairs itself with contempt. Captains who see it do not put the sight in their logs. They put it in their prayers and leave a blank space after. The Tau are new and therefore dangerous. They have not learned the true language of the galaxy yet. They still believe in design. Their ships are neat. Their formations are symmetrical enough to impress junior officers before those same officers learn what the void does to symmetry. Their fighters swarm with intent we recognize but do not share. Tau speak over open vox, calm and disappointed, and offer alternatives to dying for the Emperor. Ratings hearing these messages for the first time grow very still. Then they return to work because the ship has no room for interesting thoughts. Doctrine says close. Tau prefer range and clean math. The Navy gifts them filth, debris fields, asteroid shadows, overlapping flak, escorts that die loudly and on purpose so the rest may live. Up-close macro guns speak the old tongue and ships remember whose cathedral they are. Afterward, the officers strike the Tau's polite transmission from the record. The machine spirit keeps it anyway. Some recordings are useful as cold showers. A note must be kept for the Drukhari, separate even from their kin. They do not conquer lanes, they graze upon them. Raids that appear as removal of context. A convoy with its crews but no eyes, a fleet where the oxygen tastes like laughter, a ship that docks empty and somehow full of shadows. The Navy answers with refusal, convoys only, silent lanes, escorts whose captains train their crews to shoot at shapes the auspex will never consent to see. Victory is saved lives counted against a ledger that does not care. There are enemies that do not travel in fleets. Crude migrations that warp time around a ship until the crew grow old across a night shift. Enslavers that come through a dream and leave a bridge crew smiling and obedient to a master not present. Things with no name the administratum pretends have one. For these, the Navy deploys its oldest weapons. Superstition that proved itself, procedures whose origins are lost but whose success is recorded in the survival rates, captains who can smell a wrong temperature in the recycled air. Sometimes the best tactic is to leave. Sometimes it is to pretend to leave but remain crooked to the lane, so that whatever hunts straight lines will starve. Of all adversaries, the most loyal is distance. It fights every day in every segmentum and never takes a battle honor. Fuel runs low. Parts wear to prayer. Orders arrive from Terra carrying meanings that died centuries en route. Convoys depart with enough men to bury 3 worlds and arrive with enough to man 1 ship. There is no one to blame but the map, and the map does not apologize. The Navy cheats distance with habit. It sails when it should rest, rests when it should sail, trusts officers who know where the void likes to place accidents, packs holds with spares labeled in dead dialects because the living ones prove temporary. Distance can be won against, never defeated. The Navy counts such victories in arrivals, not in battles. Time is more intimate than distance. It lives inside the hull, it peels paint and thins patience. It rusts devotion and makes rituals feel like pretending. The answer to time is liturgy. The ship keeps the hour, the bells ring, the engines breathe, the prayers are said as if the first man to speak them is still listening. And perhaps he is. On some decks, the echo does not decay properly. The past lingers as sound. Ratings swear the ship hums the old names. Chaplains encourage them. Belief is a maintenance cycle. After 10,000 years of enemies, the Navy has learned a rule that sounds like a consolation but is a strategy. You do not outfight the galaxy. You outlast it. Doctrines change. Saints are minted. Stars die. But a ship that keeps its hours, honors its machine spirit, drills its crews, and fires when the order says fire can live long enough to watch last year's invincible terror become this year's familiar problem. The Navy does not expect victory. It expects another watch. So the charts grow heavy with warnings and little crosses for where someone's courage bled out and stained a lane forever. The admirals mark them and steer anyway. The ratings check their seals and sing under their breath. The gunners polish shell casings and write names inside where no one will see. And when the enemy comes, whatever mask it wears, the ship meets it with the same reply it has offered since the first engine lit and the first bell rang across a steel corridor pretending to be dawn. Hold the line, the void hears. It does not care, but care is not required, only continuance. And so the Imperial Navy sails on through teeth and thunder, knives and hunger, carrying a civilization that forgot how to be young across a night that does not end, a procession of lit hulls moving like prayers between the stars. There is a word the Imperial Navy uses more than any other. Not victory, not glory, not even duty. The word is vigil. It does not mean waiting, it means remaining in posture, in purpose, in faith, long after strength has become a memory and hope is a rationed thing. The Navy's war is not a campaign. It is custodianship of a civilization that is too large to love and too fragile to abandon. What it guards cannot be won. It can only be held. The philosophy of the Eternal Vigil is older than the High Lords who mouth it. It grew out of decks that learned to keep the hour even when there were no windows, and out of bridges that learned to speak softly because loud voices make frightened hands clumsy. It has 3 articles. The first is continuance. The ship must live, not the banner, not the captain's pride. If retreat preserves the engine, then retreat is sacred. If silence keeps the vox unbroken, then silence is doctrine. There is courage in ramming speed, but there is holiness in arrival. The second is containment. The rot must not spread. This is the law beneath all others. A fire is a heresy with heat. A hull breach is apostasy with teeth. Every bulkhead is a creed. Every sealed hatch is a prayer that chooses life over drama. The void is not impressed by spectacle. It is persuaded by gaskets. The third is continuity of will. The hour must be kept. A ship is a clock that remembers what it is for. Bells ring not to measure time, but to bind it, shift to shift, watch to watch, generation to generation, until the crew's pulse learns the bell's rhythm and the bell learns the crew's. This is the Eternal Vigil, the courage to be ordinary for 10,000 years. Bureaucracy is not a failing in such a world. It is a life support system. The administratum's orders arrive late. Sometimes they arrive wrong. But they arrive, and their very existence says, someone somewhere believes there will be a tomorrow that cares what you do today. A captain receives a parchment sealed in wax that took a century to cross the void. It instructs him to reroute a convoy to a world whose name the charts now list as dust. He signs the receipt. He notes the discrepancy. He forwards the convoy anyway, to the nearest living kin of the dead world, because the order's spirit is still correct. The paper is honored. The people are saved. The machine of empire groans and moves one more pace. In the segmentum commands, the logisters keep ledgers like sagas, credit of hulls, debit of worlds, interest paid in sons and daughters. They speak high Gothic because the numbers would make plain speech disloyal. They stamp filed on grief because grief unfiled multiplies. The Inquisition passes sometimes like weather. It asks questions with the weight of judgment. The admirals answer with the weight of context. A ship whose crew sang the wrong hymn still held the line. An astropath whose mind cracked still relayed the distress call. The ledger of souls is messy, and the void signs it in pencil. Faith aboard a void ship is attention. Chaplains are not orators, they are caretakers of focus. They walk the gun decks and set hands upon bruised knuckles that tremble after recoil, and upon shoulders that have forgotten how to relax. They whisper litanies that sound like checklists, because checklists are liturgy that works. Bless the breach. Bless the bolt, bless the barrel, bless the sealer's hand and the gasket's mercy. Emperor, make our timing true. Astropaths chant in choir pits, their voices braided into a rope strong enough to pull meaning across the warp. Navigators open the eye that costs them sleep and sometimes sanity, and the bridge behaves as if nothing happened. Ritual protects the fragile by turning terror into habit. Engine seers maintain shrines where the ship's machine spirit is not worshipped as a god, but consulted as an elder. They feed it incense and data, and in return it grants them the small miracles that keep steel pretending to be immortal. The vigil is practical. On the mess decks, the quartermaster knows how to turn 9 days of protein into 12 without anyone noticing but the saints. On the maintenance ladders, a senior rating teaches a novice to listen for a bearing that has learned a bad rhythm. On the bridge, an officer folds 3 contradictory orders into a single action that preserves doctrine and lives. The Navy's heroism is administrative more often than explosive. A convoy out of Hydrafor departs 4 hours early because someone miscopied a numeral, an error so dull it has no story. Yet those hours mean the fleet misses an ambush by a distance measured in minutes of light. No ballad is sung. The watch log records, deviation corrected, arrival nominal. This is how empires survive their own size. There is also the vigil of triage. The Navy is asked every day to decide which worlds live. An appeal comes from a shrine moon beset by pirates and from an agri-world whose harvest will feed 7 sectors. Both are imperial. Both are worthy. There is fuel for 1 turn and ammunition for 1 set of broadsides. A high admiral signs the order that saves the harvest and damns the shrine. He hands the pen back to his adjutant and asks for the casualty estimate before eating cold rations in silence. He sleeps 5 hours. He will carry the moon in his pocket until death. The vigil is not purity. It is stewardship in a famine of miracles. Ceremony keeps the edges from fraying. Every ship has a book of the lost. Names are etched into plasteel pages with an engraver's reluctance. When the list is read, the air recyclers hum a touch quieter, as if the ship listens to its own memory. The bell tolls once for each deck, not each soul. There isn't time for each soul. And in that arithmetic, the Navy hides both mercy and sanity. Anniversaries are held for defeats as often as for victories, because defeat that is remembered is less likely to repeat. A petty officer lights a stick of incense in a maintenance crawlspace because a friend died there when a SEAL failed 4 captains ago. No officer writes this in a log. The ship writes it in the smell of the air. The Eternal Vigil is an economy of attention. Void beacons must be checked before they flicker. Way stations must be resupplied before they empty. Charts must be amended when a star decides to age impolitely and alter gravity in ways the textbooks dislike. Signals must be relayed even when they are only rumors with coordinates attached. The Navy does not disdain rumor. Rumor kept alive by distance turns often enough into warning. A master of signals who forwards a superstition with the right tag saves more lives than a captain who wins a duel. The most precious resource in the fleet is margin. Fuel not burned, shells not fired, alertness not spent on pride. Admirals hoard it like relics, captains spend it like fathers who have learned how expensive youth is. Command under vigil is an art without applause. A bridge that does not shout is a bridge that is trained. Orders travel down the spine of the ship as pulses, not thunder. The helmsman adjusts thrust by a whisper's worth, and the cruiser slides across a kill lane like a thought deciding not to be spoken. A captain wears 2 faces, one for the deck, full of certainty, one for the chart table made of arithmetic and regret. He knows when to lie. Yes, the resupply is certain. He knows when to tell the truth. No, we cannot go back. He knows when to be a priest and when to be a machine. The great sin is not fear. The great sin is noise, wasting crew attention on anything that does not make the ship more itself. There is a vigil of language. The Navy learns to speak in ways the void respects. Reports are short, prayers are short, eulogies are short because the living must return to living. A great many sentences end with, "As per standing order." Standing orders are the Navy's scripture. They are the skeleton that lets muscles work. In high command, policy is forged out of attrition truths. Ships are slower than fires. Messages are slower than lies. Help is slower than hunger. Therefore, pre-position hulls, encode doctrine into habits, train captains to decide in the Emperor's name and forgive them when deciding hurts. The vigil does not excuse cruelty. It merely explains hardness. And then, there is the vigil kept by those who will never be decorated. The woman who calibrates a lance focus coil with fingers that no longer feel heat because heat and time took sensation as tithe. The boy who carries powder and learns to recognize the pitch of the breech seal's sigh so he can duck before the recoil argues its case to his bones. The astropath who burns a year of life to push a plea for aid across a storm that eats syllables. The engine seer who sings to a failing pump for 9 hours until dignity returns to water. No banners mark their names. The ship remembers them by absence. A station that is quieter. A job that is done on time, though the hands that always did it do not arrive for shift change. The vigil has enemies, and they are ordinary. Exhaustion that pretends to be courage, tradition that confuses itself with truth, despair that rehearses the future until it becomes prophecy. The Navy fights them with maintenance schedules and liberty rotations with officers who memorize not only the firing solutions, but the faces that will execute them, with chaplains who prescribe sleep as sacrament and water as absolution. Once each year on ships that can afford it, the crew gather for the quiet hour. All machinery not essential to survival is idled, one system at a time, so that the ship can remember what it is to rest. Men and women stand in corridors and listen to the smaller hum behind the great one, the hum of their own bodies. Then the bells ring again and the engines take a breath and the hour ends. The vigil resumes more itself. What does the Eternal Vigil purchase? Not triumph, not peace. It buys tomorrow. A convoy that reaches a hungry world, a distress call that finds a listening ear, a map that is less wrong this year than last. It buys the right for a human child to look at a sky, any sky, and learn a word for blue without needing a catechism to justify it. It buys time for saints who have not yet been born to make mistakes we can forgive. It buys the continuation of a sentence the galaxy has tried to interrupt since before history learned to write. Mankind endures. In the end, the Eternal Vigil is not kept by fleets or flags. It is kept by hands. Hands that turn valves and lift shells and sign forms and carry the dead and bless the living and chart a course one fraction of a degree away from ruin. Hands that ring a bell on the hour because the hour deserves to be heard. Hands that know the hull's temperature by touch and the crew's temperature by the way. Laughter returns after a long watch. Hands that lay flat upon cold plasteel before a burn and feel the ship answer, faint and proud, still here. And through those hands, through those hours, through those bells and breaths and decisions that look small only to the uninitiated, the Imperial Navy keeps its promise to the species that birthed it. Not victory, not forgiveness, presence. We are here. We will be here when the night comes again. We will keep the hour. The ship's name is Gloria Nox, the glory of night. No one remembers who named her. The registry says her keel was laid on Mars, but the record ink is so faded the archivists debate whether the date begins with a 3 or a 5. It does not matter. She is old enough that time has stopped arguing with her. Her hull carries every age of the Imperium like rings in a tree. Layers of paint upon layers of prayer, gilded saints half buried beneath weld scars, scriptures painted over blast marks that were never truly cleaned. Her prow bears the Imperial Aquila, its wings chipped but still outstretched. Her engines burn unevenly as if the light itself must pause to catch breath. Yet she moves, slowly, surely, reverently, through the void between dying stars. Inside, her decks are quieter than most. The Gloria Nox has not seen combat in 83 years. Her crew calls her the Pilgrim Ship. Others call her the Sleeper. But among themselves, the crew have another name, whispered as a greeting, a blessing, a charm. Mother? She is one of the last of the Elder Convoy, a class of heavy cruisers once built to guard colony routes before the heresy made colony a word for myth. Now her duty is more humble and more sacred, to carry supplies, faith, and memory between worlds too far apart to remember they belong to the same species. She sails from world to world, a ghost that keeps promises on behalf of the living. There are 6,000 souls aboard the Gloria Nox. Most were born within her walls. They have never seen a planet's horizon. They have never smelled rain. To them, the sky is a ceiling of cold brass, and the stars are engine exhaust, holy, mechanical, predictable. They know her moods. When her decks tremble, she is stretching. When the lights flicker, she is thinking. When the hum of the reactors deepens by half a note, they say she is dreaming of old wars. There are jokes about her temper, stories about her ghost. Every ship has a ghost. The Gloria Nox's ghost is kind. She hums lullabies through the vents when the long watches grow heavy. The youngest crew members swear they can hear words. No one corrects them. The captain is Severine Holt, a woman born on the ship, raised on its decks, and one day chosen by its machine spirit. Her rank insignia is older than she is. Her voice is calm, her hands steady. She has seen warp storms and pirate fleets, and all of them have passed like weather. She believes in the Vigil, not as doctrine, but as duty. Every evening she walks the length of the bridge, touches the plasteel of the main viewport, and whispers the same words her predecessor spoke to her. You are the light between worlds. You are the space between breaths. You will not go dark. It is not a command. It is a vow. The Gloria Nox sails through the pale expanse, a sector of cold stars and forgotten colonies. The charts call it lightly trafficked. The crew call it what it is, lonely. There are no Imperial patrols here anymore. The Navy's strength has been pulled elsewhere, to crusades, to sieges, to worlds that still make noise when they die. The Gloria Nox is alone, and yet she goes on. Her holds carry seeds from Agrippina, catechisms printed on lead foil sheets, and the ashes of a cardinal who requested burial where the light has not been seen in 100 years. The ship carries meaning in bulk. Her engines hum, her lights burn, her crew keeps the hour. The bells still ring. The vigil continues. One watch cycle, the auspex pings, a faint return, a signal repeating on an ancient code, a distress call. No coordinates, no voice, only a repeating pulse. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause. A heartbeat, old Navy code, predating even Gothic standard. A signal of identity lost and not forgotten. Captain Holt listens in silence. The bridge crew looks to her for orders. They know what she will say, but they wait to hear it. We turn toward the sound. The Gloria Nox alters course. Her engines flare gold, cutting through a region of dust thick enough to hide a world. As she approaches the signal's origin, the auspex image clarifies: a ship drifting. No lights, no drive emissions, no life signs. Just a hulk, ancient, half swallowed by debris. The nameplate is cracked, letters lost to corrosion and time, but the few that remain are enough to sting memory. Sanctity of Iron, an Imperial ship, a sister, lost for nearly 4,000 years. They approach cautiously, the void silent except for the whisper of static. The boarding teams prepare. Void suits sealed, weapons blessed, vox lines open for prayer. When they breach, they find stillness. The Sanctity's corridors are frozen in mid-moment. Tools left where they fell, doors half open, skeletons curled in alcoves, as if the crew simply stopped in the middle of a breath and never finished it. There is no sign of violence, only absence. At the heart of the ship lies the chapel. The candles are long burned to dust, the altar remains. Behind it, carved in fading gold leaf, are the words of an ancient naval creed. To stand is to serve, to endure is to obey. The Emperor counts the hours, not the victories. Captain Holt stands before it for a long time. Then she orders her crew to recover what relics remain. Data logs, hull fragments, the ship's bell. The bell is cracked, but when struck, it still rings. The sound carries through the Gloria Nox's decks later that night. Faint, beautiful, eternal. For 3 days they work. Then by Holt's order, then by Holt's, they withdraw. The Sanctity of Iron is too far gone to tow. Its hull is weak, its reactors long cold. But before they leave, the Gloria Nox performs an old ceremony, one most ships have forgotten. They ignite a single lance battery, not as a weapon, but as a torch. They aim it at the derelict's bridge and fire a beam of pure, controlled light, bright as a sunrise no world will ever see. For 27 seconds, the void around the Sanctity glows. Her shape, once black and forgotten, becomes silver, almost living. For a moment, she looks awake again. Then the light fades and the stars reclaim her. The Gloria Nox turns away. On the bridge, Captain Holt records the final entry. Contact made with sanctity of iron. No survivors, spirit honored, vigil maintained. She closes the log, signs her name, and seals the entry with a thumbprint of blood. Old tradition, older than any ink. Then she leans back, listening to the quiet hum of her ship. Somewhere deep within the decks, the recovered bell tolls once, as if in reply. Days pass. The Gloria Nox continues her route through the pale expanse. No one speaks much of what they saw. But every night more candles appear in the small chapels along the corridors. Unordered, uncounted, lit by hands that cannot explain why they needed to. The ship grows brighter, not with power, said with remembrance. It is said that in those days, if you walked her lower decks at the change of watch, you could hear a second hum beneath the engines, a harmony, the echo of another ship sailing beside her in spirit. When the Gloria Nox finally reaches her next destination, a mining moon with more scars than sky, the colonists stare upward as her silhouette blots the stars. They have not seen a Navy ship in 20 years. They fall to their knees not because of faith, but because of relief. From orbit, the ship transmits her standard message. Supplies inbound. The light still burns. It is a phrase older than the Imperium itself, and it means everything. The colonists answer with a single line of Vox code. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause. The same signal the Gloria Nox once followed into the dark. A greeting, a heartbeat. Captain Holt smiles. She replies in kind. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause. And across the black between stars, for one fleeting moment, the void has a pulse again. When her mission is done, the Gloria Nox will turn for home. If home still exists. If not, she will keep sailing. There is always another world, another signal, another place that forgot it was not alone. Her crew will keep the hour. Her engines will hum. Her bell will toll when it must. And somewhere the Emperor will listen. Not for victory, but for the sound of a ship still moving, still serving, still alive. Because in the end, that is the Navy's greatest act of faith. To move forward, even when the stars are dying. The Gloria Nox sails on, through storms of dust, through memories of wars that have no survivors left to recall them, through distances that make time flinch. Her lights are small, but they are many. Her voice is quiet, but it carries. And in her wake, she leaves not conquest, not peace, but proof that humanity was here and that it refused to go quietly. And so, the ships sail on, through silence, through memory, through the endless dark that forgets all names. The bells still ring, the vigil endures, and somewhere in the cold between the stars, a single light says, "We are still here." If you've drifted this far with us, thank you. May your dreams carry you beyond the void, and may the Emperor guide your rest. If you'd like to keep wandering the stars with me, join me again next time as we uncover more forgotten stories of the 41st Millennium. Subscribe, leave a like to keep the beacon burning, and tell me in the comments, which Imperial Navy ship do you think still sails the dark, keeping its lonely watch? Until then, sleep well, traveler of the void. The light still burns.